down your business. Call our tax experts today at 1-800-783-0810 and let us deal with the IRS while you focus on your business. That's 1-800-783-0810. Again, that's 800-783-0810.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
The following program contains coarse language and adult themes. Listener discretion is advised.
Why did you cry? I listen to it at night. I like the girl talk. It makes me feel alright. I like scary stories in the morning, and I like them at night.
Welcome KLRN Radio friends and family. Tonight, I am announcing that this is the final episode of Talk Murder to Me podcast. But y'all have no fear. We aren't going anywhere. We're not going anywhere. We're only changing the name of the podcast. There's other podcasts out there with the same name that's Talk Murder to Me. So we're just going to rebrand it by a new name. The same premise, the same.
Yeah, nothing about the show is changing except for the name now.
Yeah, we're still going to do the same deal. Keeping the same format, same bat time, same bat station. But anyways, Talk Murder to Me will be changing just the name and in name only. So, welcome, KLRN friends and family, to the new episode number 1 of the Front Porch Forensics podcast. It is, I am Bump Stock Ken, your co-host. And as always, my co-host in life and partner in crime and lady of my dreams, your hostess with the mostest, Bump Stock Barbie.
You probably should have said nightmares there because I think I scare him a little bit.
A little bit.
But yeah, we're not on our front porch now because we live in the deep south and it's ungodly hot and muggy outside. But we've got Zelda Gabriel with us tonight because she was on before and we told y'all that she's about to graduate with a degree in psychology, which makes this episode actually very, very relevant to her. We've got Rick producing, but tonight we're actually just going to be discussing not a specific case or anything. We're just going to discuss. It's a very hotly debated topic, even now in the psychology world, but it's the nature versus nurture argument. And nature refers to more of the biological characteristics that we are born with, your hair color, your eye color. But this does include genetic predispositions towards certain traits. Like, for instance, I have an anxiety disorder, and I actually get that from my dad, who had an anxiety disorder and depression.
Yeah.
So
I have the disorder of being completely awesome. If nothing else, I'm too calm in most situations. So
this was not a felt tip pen. I'd poke you with it.
You probably will. Yeah. She has poked me with one of her needles before.
Yeah.
Like enough to draw the blood. But
well, I told you not to tickle my feet, so you learned.
I learned.
But anyway, nurture actually refers to the external influences that shape us, your experiences, the culture around you, your society, relationships to other people, that kind of thing. And in the context of how this applies to, like, in our show and everything, the violent offenders, the psychopaths, the sociopaths, all that, like, is it nature? Is it nurture? Is it a combination of the two? Like, that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. But I want to open up, and I've got this book that I'm going to show you guys if everybody can see it. The big book of serial killers, like the Encyclopedia of Serial Killers. And you should be able to see the author's name there. You can find it on Amazon. That's where I found mine. But he's got a section for nature versus nurture back here.
This is her. This is what she reads in the evenings when she's getting ready to go to bed. You know how most couples like you see where they're laying in bed at night and one's on their phone, the other one's got like a romance novel or a Harry Potter novel, whatever it is.
I know mine's either like Stephen King or this.
Yeah, this is Stephen King or these kind of books. So.
Yeah, apparently I'm the reason my parents locked their door at night when I was a child. So, but I'm going to go ahead and read this. Then Zelda, I'll actually after this we'll go to you, and I've got a video that we're going to show later too from an actual psychologist that we actually went to see in April because she had a psychology of serial killers speaking tour that she went on. But she is a clinician; she's a forensic psychologist. So we're going to show her video here in a little while, but I'll go ahead and read this. He says, for many serial killers, the desire to kill is as innate as their hair or eye color and out of control. But most experts say that childhood trauma is an experience shared by them all. In 1990, Colin Wilson and Donald Seaman, I'll go ahead and pause because I know there's going to be a joke coming.
I didn't have nothing to say about Mr. Donald Seaman. He's kind of a salty guy, is what I've heard. You know. Some people can take him easy. Some it's really hard to take him. I don't know. I mean.
Okay. Colin Wilson and Donald Seaman conducted a study of serial. Shut up.
I heard Donald likes pineapple.
Donald his favorite drink is pineapple juice. That's correct.
Okay,
Says it makes him sweeter.
Both of you are going to have to shush.
He's spunky. Already shared that one. That's his fault.
Yeah, everything. We can blame a lot on Orty, actually. So.
Yeah.
I blame everything on Orty, so it's fine.
We're going to have to move Pat. Just call him Donald because I'm not going to be able
Okay. Colin Wilson and Donald
to.
Conducted a study of serial killers behind bars and found that childhood problems were the most influential factors that led serial killers down their particular path of death and destruction. Former FBI profiler Robert Ressler, and he actually worked with John Douglas from the show like Mindhunter. They were the team there. They are the fathers of criminal profiling. So they coined the term serial killer and criminal profiling. He went so far as to say that 100% of all serial killers experienced childhoods that were not filled with happy memories of camping trips or like fishing on the lake. According to Ressler, of all the serial killers he interviewed or studied, each one suffered from some form of abuse as a child, whether it be sexual, physical, or emotional abuse, neglect or rejection by their parents, or humiliation, which actually includes instances that occurred at school. For those who are already hovering psychologically on the edge due to maybe their unfortunate genetics, such events become the focal points that drive a killer to act on seemingly insane instincts. And those focal points, they actually, in criminal profiling now, they call them catalysts. There's something that triggers it in their mind. So that's a catalyst. It says, because there is often no solid family unit, parents are missing or more focused on drugs and alcohol, sexual abuse tends to go unnoticed, physical abuse is very common. The child's development becomes stunted. They can either develop deep-seated rage or create for themselves a fantasy world where everything is perfect and they are essentially the kings of their self-made castle. That was the world that Jeffrey Dahmer, who recognized his need for control much later, after hours, spent in analyzing the impact of sexual assault as a child, as well as his parents' messy and angry divorce. And it says, quote, after I left home, that's when I started wanting to create my own little world where I was the one who had complete control. I just took it way too far. And that's a direct quote from Jeffrey Dahmer. Dahmer's experience suggests that psychopathic behavior likely develops in childhood when, due to neglect and abuse, children revert to a place of fantasy, a world where the victimization of the child shifts outwards towards others. One expert is quoted here as saying the child becomes sociopathic because the normal development of the concepts of right and wrong and empathy towards others is retarded because the child's emotional and social development occurs within that self-centered fantasy. A person can do no wrong in their own little world, and the pain of others is of no consequence when the purpose of the fantasy is to satisfy the needs of one person. So as the lines between fantasy and reality become blurred, fantasies that on their own are harmless, they become real, and monsters find themselves strapping young boys down to wooden boards and torturing them and treating the act like little more than a disassociative art project that ends in murder. So that's what the book says there, those experts and everything. Zelda, what do you think about that?
Okay, the thing is, first of all, nature and nurture, those are no longer used terms as much. If you look on Google and stuff like that, you'll still find nature and nurture if you like want to search that specific argument. Typically, it's more environment and genetics, or environment and biology, or environment development and biology, things like that, because those terms are like more easy to they're easier to understand, because nature and nurture, I know from experience when I first started learning this stuff, nature and nurture were kind of confusing, because I was like, wait, is nurture like the way you're born? Is nature like, so that tends to be used for clarity's sake, but um it people aren't typically like, as I think the book kind of points out, like people aren't typically, while there are extremists still that kind of believe that, like, okay, it's either uh uh genetic or biological determinism, which is like, okay, it's just genetics, it's just, biology, it's just this, or you have blank slate views, which is like the notion that you are merely like, you are not merely, I shouldn't say, but you are the way that you grew up and that kind of thing. You are the way that you're raised and that kind of thing. Most psychologists now look at it in terms of, okay, not which is the more superior one, but rather like, it's more like, okay, how do those things interplay and how do they work, so that for the case of like forensic psychology and clinical psychology, which is clinical psychology being more my thing, um and forensic psychology being the focus of this show, and sort of Laura's focus, is that it focuses on these, like how these genetic and environmental factors interplay in such a degree that you come to these mental illnesses and these maladaptive behaviors and thoughts, and how you get to that point, rather than, okay, well, this one's better than the other one, or this one's better than the other one, kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's why it's debated in the psychology world, because early on, when it was still called nature versus nurture, there were some people that thought it was purely genetic, and then there were others that thought, no, it's how you're raised, it's your environment, like all that shapes you. Now we actually have kind of learned that very, very often, I think in most cases, I would say, it's a combination of both.
Yeah, I'm thinking about have to be a combination of the two. Now, Lady Gaga says that she was born this way, so she may disagree. She probably thinks it's more of a nature type
Nature thing.
situation.
I myself, because we're talking about, whether, like, which one, that kind of thing, around other reasons. There's two sides, like extremes, let me put it that way. There's two extremes. Psychologists now tend to be more in the middle and tend to say, okay, to what degree does each, contribute to this, and then how do they interplay? But there still are extremists on each side. There's nativists, which is those who hold the position that genetics and biology is more important than nurture, if not the entire cause, and that, like, maturation is the reason for, like, later on experiences and things that arise. because of like a biological switch. Basically, it's a biological switch that comes on,
Right.
and then you have empiricists, which are those who hold the position that basically the opposite position, which is in that environment and outside factors are more important, if not the entire cause. Me, since y'all have invited me on, so I mean I might as well share what I think. Me, I'm more of an empiricist. I'm not like hardline empiricist, but if I were to lean one or the other, I would say empiricism. I would be more of an empiricist. I believe that it's more the way that you're raised and that kind of thing, because even the diathesis stress model, which is like basically where you have genetics, and you inherit a certain likelihood of having a mental disorder. It's then expressed in these specific environments, like for example, we're talking about uh uh antisocial personality disorder, which is what psychopathy and sociopathy, what these terms are now classified under. um it's basically this notion that, okay, let's say you have this inherited likelihood um of having these mental health conditions, and things like that, or of in this case, antisocial personality disorder. But then let's say you're put in an environment, though, which is the stress part of it. You're put in an environment where you're abused, you're neglected, whatever, things like that. Those are that's the diathesis stress model. And so it kind of, these two interplay, and for me, I think that I'd be more of an empiricist, simply because if you don't have, in the diathesis stress model, it basically says if you don't have if let's say you have this amount of likelihood for a mental illness like antisocial personality disorder, you have, unless you're in an environment that allows that to be expressed, like such as abuse, um trauma, whatever it may be, witnessing trauma even, then those traits may not, or are more, or are less likely to come to fruition. So
And the fact that, okay, you mentioned, nature versus nurture are outdated terms for the conversation we're having, but that's kind of what everybody, their mind goes to.
mhm.
Also with psychopathy and sociopathy. So if Rick has got the video ready, it's about 4 minutes, but it's that forensic psychologist, and she actually kind of goes in depth and provides like the brain scans and everything. So if he's got that ready to go, we can go ahead and play that out.
Is that the one we went to the show?
Mhm.
What's the difference between psychopathy, sociopathy, and antisocial personality disorder? This was one of the most common questions asked during my tour, and it's one of the biggest areas of confusion, not just within the general public, but within my field as well. Clinicians, academics, many are still unable to fully agree on actual definitions. So here goes. Psychopathy is generally considered an inherited condition related to the underdevelopment of parts of the brain responsible for emotional regulation and impulse control. So the psychopathic individual is often thought to have been born, not made. However, it has yet to be proven that babies are born with these so-called underdeveloped parts of the brain and then later become psychopaths. It's just a theory. The psychopathic brain isn't examined in infancy, and we don't see the scans until well after they've become dangerous criminals. The undeveloped parts likely come from highly dysfunctional, abusive, and neglectful environments in childhood, regardless of what criminals say about their so-called perfect childhoods. Sociopathy, on the other hand, implies antisocial behaviors are learned, something stemming from social and environmental factors alone, such as dysfunctional upbringing or traumatic experiences in childhood. So in other words, sociopathic individuals were made, not born. And yet, How can someone prove that there were zero genetic factors that contributed to the development of the condition and later behaviors? Psychopaths are generally viewed as more controlled and charming. Their manipulation is more detached. They plan way ahead. These individuals might be disturbed to the point of not recognizing the difference between right and wrong. Sociopaths, on the other hand, have less consistent behavior than psychopaths. Their experience of anxiety is expressed outward, and they find rage far harder to control. They may act without forehand thought, and as a result have a harder time blending in. The inconsistencies between their words and their lives may be easier to see. In my opinion, sociopathy can be understood as a kind of a psychopathy light. Unlike psychopathy, which proposes causation emerges from both nature and nurture, sociopathy suggests that only nurture is responsible for its development. Both terms have been used interchangeably by clinicians and academics alike, yet neither term constitutes a diagnostic category in the current edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM-5. So antisocial personality disorder is the diagnostic term for things that are considered sociopathic or psychopathic in behavior. So here's the official definition of antisocial personality disorder. You can see there's a pervasive pattern of disregard for and violation of the rights of others occurring since the age of 15 years. Failure to conform to laws and social norms, deceitfulness, impulsivity or failure to plan ahead, irritability and aggressiveness, reckless disregard for safety of self and others, consistent irresponsibility, and a lack of remorse. The individual needs to be at least 18 years of age, and there's also been evidence of conduct disorder with onset before age 15. Nature and nurture both play a role in the development of antisocial personality disorder, yet the reasons behind its development are still not fully understood. People often assume that those with antisocial personality disorders are always criminals and are easy to spot, but many are unaware of the disorder and may never be diagnosed. The vast majority of criminals, we're talking 80 to 85%, will meet antisocial personality disorder criteria, but only 20% would qualify for what some psychologists would consider bona fide psychopathy. These disagreements regards to terminology make it very difficult to study psychopathy and explore treatment options. At the end of the day, famous 20th century Austrian philosopher Wittgenstein perhaps put it best when he said, "We created language to F ourselves up." But curious to hear your thoughts on the topic and if you have any other questions regarding these definitions.
Yeah, so that kind of gives a clear understanding from like an actual doctor. Like she is the forensic psychologist. We went to see her back in April because she did the big tour and everything, and it was awesome. Daniel actually jotted down a good point. Has anybody ever watched the show It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia? Like, yeah. I mean, do we have people in the comments like that know the show? Like, because if you know Dennis, like Dennis is going to be an example here.
Yeah, sociopath. I
think he would be classified as a sociopath.
He's also one of my favorite characters on the show too, which is kind of weird.
He is a mess. Like, tell him about the boat thing.
I don't remember exact quotes on it, but it's always
just
sunny in Philadelphia.
General,
I mean,
general terms.
Yeah, he had got him. He's a single guy. He's a narcissist to the 10th degree, you know. And he bought himself a boat. They live in Philadelphia, and he bought himself a boat. And his thing was he would take his dates out miles from shore. And he would tell them, you know, he wanted to have sex with them out on the boat, and that it would be in their best interest if they did. And his brother or his buddy there is like, "Wait, you mean you're gonna kick her off the boat if she doesn't sleep with you?" He's like, "No, I never said that, but it's implied."
Yeah, I think he would definitely qualify as more the sociopath aspect of that. Definitely antisocial personality disorder, but that's kind of an illustration of how these people behave in real life. I mean, other people, their wants, their needs, their fears, their hopes, like it does not matter to them at all.
It's all about themselves and their satisfaction of what they want and need at that moment.
So, and that stems from either just something in their brain not being wired right, and then a combination of how they were raised. Because usually, like, if there is a genetic component, and like she said in the video, we've not studied the brain scans in infancy or, young children. It's only ever after they become violent.
Well, for that to work, you'd have to scan every child that's ever born.
Yeah.
And then keep up
to
with
get
that
a
child.
baseline.
And then keep up with that information throughout its entire life, basically, to see if it's going to be
right. It would be massive.
That's not even ethical. I mean, you can't. That would violate a host of psychological, ethical issues.
Well, this would be more the physiological aspect of it too. So that's why I wonder, because I mean, medical procedures on a child, as long as the parents consent, that's not unethical.
Yes, but studying a child, like, to see if they become violent and something about that, like, at least in my point of view, maybe if the parent consents and, you have experts and that kind of thing, it's fine. But, like, in my point of view, something about that, like, just doesn't ring as part of an ethical, like, okay, we're going to track these children, and if they become violent, we're going to then, like, look at them closer kind of thing. I don't know.
I mean, we're talking about, like, if this were going to be a study, like if I were going to conduct this study, say I was, doctor, psychologist, scientist, whatever. If I was going to conduct this study, I would have to first have a pool of, obviously, the subjects. So children within like a year to, let's say, like 5 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, this is approved of by their parents. Their parents are going to do this. We scan their brains, once every 6 months, let's say, so twice a year.
Yeah.
We just kind of track that and everything. And it's not necessarily trying to determine which ones will become violent, but it's just that if certain subjects in that pool do become violent, are their brain scans different from the other children who have not become violent?
Yeah.
Yes,
you need to set this also up in the Pacific Northwest, because that's where the vast majority. I was about to say,
right there on that West Coast.
There's a high majority. California up that way. There's a lot of serial killers come from that area too.
Most of them.
You would need to make sure that you had a control group, though, too.
That's what I'm saying. You have a set group. Like, go ahead and get the first scans right after birth and everything,
Yeah.
Get that baseline for when they were born. This is how their brain functions. Like this, we've got these images, these scans. And then 6 months later, you do it again. And you just kind of track from there.
Yeah,
that's actually very fascinating. That would be a fascinating study. It'd be a good thing to write a thesis on, I'll tell you that. if I
this is the kind of stuff that, like, I think about. And, like, I'm not even in school for this. So if you need ideas for papers, like, I got you.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, hey, if I do decide to become a clinical psychologist, I can choose.
I'm looking here at the comments. That's my friend John. And he said, I'd be afraid of what they would find if they scanned my brain. I actually have a book in there by neurologists who studied the brains of psychopaths. And for his control group, he didn't even realize, he was not informed necessarily. Like, he didn't know. It was a blind study. His brain scans were actually included in the study group. And he found out that his brain actually showed the same areas of the brain were lit up or were dark and everything as a psychopath. So he started actually analyzing his own behavior with his own family and friends and everything. And he was like, he even questioned, like, did I actually want to marry my wife, or did I do this just to kind of manipulate her and control her because that's who I am? Like, he was always very disconnected, but he found that out completely by accident.
Yeah. And that's where, when we're talking, because we're talking about studies and these different kinds of studies that people do, for, like, how much does nature influence, how much does nurture influence, how much do they, to use those terms, that the more colloquial terms, and how do they intertwine, twin studies, those are used a lot in order to look at mental health conditions like personality disorders, like mood disorders, like schizo sort of disorders.
Now that's interesting because I mean, twins are obviously like genetically identical, but there have been cases of one twin having like a severe mental or emotional disorder and everything, and the other twin being completely fine.
Well, yeah, that's the crucialness of understanding genetics on mental health, talking about that if I'm correct, nature side of things. Because again, even I get them confused. You have identical and fraternal twins. Identical, obviously, being the same. They have the same genetic material, that kind of thing. Fraternal twins they're basically like regular brothers and sisters, or basic brothers, or
Right.
they only have half that material. So what scientists will do is they'll study these identical twins, these what is the big term, I can't even say it.
Monozygotic or something.
Yeah, something like
Yeah.
that. I can't even say it. They'll study these identical twins and then compare them to fraternal twins, and compare identical twins that have been separated, twins that have fraternal twins that have been separated, twins that have lived together, to see the genetic components involved in things like ASPD, which is antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, even mood disorders and things like that. So it's very fascinating because it looks at like, okay, adoption, for example, how does growing up in even the nurture side of things, though, because it asks the question, okay, how much does living in a different environment influence things? If you have one twin that's adopted by a loving family versus a twin that's adopted by a very abusive family, the likelihood of mental disorders is still going to be different. So I thought that would be something kind of fascinating to talk about too, is these twin studies.
I say you mentioned twins, and I say it's a fun fact, but it may actually kind of terrify everybody again. But my mama says that I was actually a twin.
Yeah.
Like, she had miscarried and went to the doctor thinking, because my parents were married, I think, for 7 years or so before I was born, maybe. But my mom always had trouble conceiving. I had an older brother that was miscarried. He died at 7 months. But my mom says that I actually was a twin because when she thought she miscarried, she went into the doctor and they said she was still pregnant. So apparently I just kicked my twin out.
You said, nope, this is my womb. This is my spot.
Apparently so. I don't know. But maybe that could go towards like the nature side of things. Just maybe that's why I'm wired towards this stuff. Like,
I think you might have kept that personality, and you switch back and forth sometimes.
Something interesting. John,
you just pointed out the entire story of the dark half.
Yeah, basically. Oh no, and that's a phenomenal story too. But that was, I mean, I don't even know how it worked, but it's Stephen King. So, well, I think he wrote that as Richard Bachman, but still, the dark half. You remember that one? He was the writer.
Yeah.
He had the writer's block and everything. Richard Stark was the
Is that the one with the birds and all that?
Yeah, the sparrows.
Yeah, the sparrows. Yeah.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
I need to reread that one.
Let me just say, John Clouser, he says in the comments, I know you were talking about children, but I think the older I get, the more my mental health has become thrown out the window. That's actually fascinating because it not only harkens back to this argument of, okay, while genetics are important, how important is nurture, and how do they interplay? But it also goes back to the fact that a lot of people tend to think, okay, you're born with these mental illnesses, you're born with good mental health, bad mental health, but as you go through life and as your experiences change, and as genetics isn't everything. This
Yeah, I mean,
nature
look at our culture today. What we're being immersed with all the time in the news is always negative.
Oh yeah.
Like there's so much there that I mean, especially for adults. Like, that's why I don't turn on the news very much anymore. Because it's just like I'll get down into a funk because everything seems like it's just going to hell in a handbasket. So
Yeah, it might as well get me mad.
I mean, I don't even like. I'm a lot less political than I was, like, say a year or two ago. I was really immersed in it at one point. Like, that's pretty much all I did. Um, and I'm still political to an extent, but not nearly as much. And I've come to see that even since having these moments of, even if it's just like an hour or something, of taking a break from the news cycle is much better on me. And I've noticed that, like, that helps my mental health too, because being inundated with negativity and this misery is just, it's bad for us. But it definitely, I guess my point in pointing out that comment is that it's important that we look at mental health and this sense of, or this psychology, as something that isn't just, okay, you're born and then you die this way, and then that's kind of, it's something that changes and that becomes worse or even better over time. I know with borderline personality disorder, something that, while it kind of gets under my skin, I also understand it, is borderline personality disorder, which is one of the conditions I have. You are, whenever you're younger, when you're like my age, for example, 20s, 30s, that kind of thing, you're more likely to have it than, say, somebody that's in their 60s or 70s or something like that, because as you get older, you kind of get you get that thicker skin, but you also get, like, you just have a better outlook on life. So
yeah, John, he talks about working in customer service and retail. I mean, I was a bartender for about close to 10 years. So, yeah, I mean, you hear everybody's stories, because apparently when people get out in public, they just don't care anymore. Like, they'll talk to anybody, and that's very odd to me. But, like, it goes back, psychopathy even. I think that's why there are some people that are not affected the same way. Like, they can see all these horrible things that we always see in the news and everything and not be affected by it, because there's that disconnect there.
Yeah.
Because they don't, it's not that they don't feel feelings or anything. They do have feelings. It's just that they cannot, their feelings don't emote the same way towards other people like ours do.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Like, if I'm upset, if I'm anxious, like, it upsets him. He gets worried. And that psychopath would be the exact opposite. Like, it wouldn't faze him at all.
That's like during I mean, obviously I'm not a psychopath or anything like that, but I mean, Rick might disagree, but but
I plead the fifth and I'm drinking it.
But the thing is, with with my hypomanic episode, I had my first hypomanic episode like a, a like last month sometime, and I remember, even though it's not as long term, and it's not to the same extent as psychopathy, for instance, and for antisocial personality disorder, I did have this sense of, like, I don't care. I just don't care. Like, I was completely, I mean, I was kind of, my head was in the clouds, but, like, I just did not, I wasn't worried about anything. And that was something that definitely, like, in the back of my head, especially the next day, whenever I finally came down a little bit, I was like, that's something's wrong, because I'm a very anxious person, and the fact that I'm just laughing and making these, like, really crass, like, jokes, and just swearing at people like I don't care. I mean, so that, the fact that it's just important to think about, like, okay, there's a line between, not caring and just and having a thick skin, versus, like, okay, there's something wrong. And then I feel like psychopaths never get to that point.
Yeah, because they probably basically live their lives like that, I would assume. I mean, I don't personally know. I mean, I think the closest I ever came so far to just not caring, I guess, was when Daddy died.
Yeah, but I think that's also
that's a grief response, though, and that's a normal thing. You lose somebody that's close to you, and like it's going to affect you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you just can't get around that. But
you go into
I
shock
guess my apathy was a normal grief response then.
You were probably in shock if you were to ask me. I think that you were just, your brain was like, I haven't processed this yet. And that in that time of not processing it, you basically shut down in order to cope and to process it. And then once you processed it, it was like, okay, dunk my brain in the water kind of thing.
Yeah, I definitely think shock was part of it, because this is now the second year. December will be the anniversary of when he died. And this year has been worse because it's so much more real to me, I guess. Like at the time it was, I think I even said at his memorial that the one thing that my daddy never taught me was how to live in a world where he doesn't exist anymore. So I guess that whole first year was just trying to navigate that. And I was very numb to a lot of things, and I shouldn't have been. Like, I see you nodding, so I know that you, there's probably even instances you could probably name that I was not even aware of at the time. But this year definitely has been worse because it's not new anymore. It's not a shock. It became real, I guess. So
people grieve in different ways. And the thing is, like, when my grandfather passed away, he's passed away, this is the third or fourth year that he's, let's see, 20, so third year, sorry, not fourth year, third year since he's passed away. And like, I always thought he was going to be around forever, and that he was going to be like, he got through, I mean, he had like 15 back surgeries, all this kind of stuff. And I just, like, usually I'm pretty like, I don't, it doesn't bother me very much, or not, it doesn't bother me, but it doesn't affect me the way that it affects like my older brother and some of my other family members. But when I think about like the things he'll miss, like my wedding and my birthdays from now on and things like that, I tend to have those moments where I break down, because grief is grief and these emotions, to kind of tie it back to the whole, to tie it back to antisocial personality and these mental health disorders. Even besides antisocial personality disorder, grief is something that everybody experiences differently, and emotions are something that everybody experiences differently. But they're still, we still experience them. And to me, that's the thing when it comes to, and I'll let you talk in a second, I promise, but for me, the thing with psychopathy and sociopathy, I'm probably butchering that. It for me, I would say they're more on a spectrum, because I've always been taught since starting my psychology student career, is that, if you want to put it that way, is that everything is on a spectrum. Every emotion that we feel, even those included in mental illnesses, are at one end decent, fine, normal, whatever. It's when they become very severe. And I think that psychopathy is the most severe form of this antisocial personality, this lack of care, this, however you want to put it, whereas sociopathy is probably like in the middle to more like, not middle, but it's closer to psychopathy, but it's not completely there. It's kind of, it's in that, it's kind of in the middle, in the sense that it's like, okay, you feel some things, and some things get to you and you act out in these ways, but in other ways it's more like psychopathy, where it's like you just, you don't have that regard for other people.
Yeah, there are the differences between psychopathy and sociopathy and everything, but there is a lot of overlap between the two, which is why it's still one of those, or two of those terms that are never agreed upon in psychology, because there is so much overlap. But I think typically the psychopath, they don't connect like we would. And emotions are entirely subjective, but there are those extremes where you get into the psychopathy and the sociopathy and everything. where it is so far out of the norm that you notice it. That like it actually, now they have their own terms for it. But there's a lot of overlap between those two. So that's why it's such a debated thing.
Yeah.
Exactly. And
And
that's why, like, oh, sorry, go ahead, Daniel.
No, it's fine. Go ahead. You're good.
I was just going to say, that's why, like, in the video, even though obviously she's a professional and she probably knows way more than I do, that was something I kind of disagreed on, was she was like, okay, psychopathy is you are it's kind of you're born this way or that kind of thing, whereas sociopathy is kind of like you it's because of your environment and that kind of thing. And for me,
Yeah.
I've always seen them as a spectrum of, okay, they're part of this antisocial personality group, but then you have the spectrum of like, okay, there's, maybe you feel an empathy towards one person and then you don't feel empathy towards anybody, and then that spectrum, if you will. So
Yeah, I think when you get an antisocial personality, it is the kind of that line. And there's probably that middle ground where you get the most overlap, but you've got like psychopathy at one end, sociopathy on the other end. But I think most people are probably grouped right there in the middle between the two. Because, I mean, let's think like, we'll use some for instances, like Ted Bundy, I think is a good one to use because fairly normal upbringing, really no abuse that we know of.
Yeah, he even reported that he had a normal childhood.
Yeah, very normal, like upper middle class suburbia upbringing. But then, like later on in his life, he found out that the woman that he thought was his sister his entire life was actually his mother, and that there were rumors that her father, his grandfather, was actually his father too. Mm-hmm. So that's a traumatic experience right there.
Oh,
and
yeah.
if there was something maybe psychologically going on with the grandfather, that could have been inherited. So there's your nature side of things.
Yeah.
And then you get the trauma side from this, which, what he thought was his mother, what he thought was his sister. These are women who have lied to him about huge things that, he probably should have known.
That would be
that's probably why he hated women.
That would be the nurture side of it, just all at once.
Yeah.
It's like
just finding all that out, and everything he knew about his life was upended.
Yeah. I wonder how he found out about that too.
I think it was like neighborhood rumors from what I heard, like family and the neighbors and people just the rumor mill talking.
Kids in school have the best opportunity for yo mama jokes ever there, because it could tie into your sister jokes too. All at once. I think it's like a lot of times.
Let's say he gets mad, and all you got to say is, "At least my mama's not my sister."
Yeah. A lot of times, nurture is the nurture side of it.
It's very key, I think.
The nurture side of it, in some cases, I'd imagine that you may not realize in your own personal life that there is trauma happening. You may not think, well, I was never beaten or I was never sexually molested, so I guess I had it pretty good. But there was some things. There was some things going on that to you thought, well, I didn't know that was traumatic. But
I can actually use myself as an example in a conversation that I've had with Zelda. But like my childhood and everything, I mean, I became very close with my dad. I mean, he got better, and he worked on his issues and everything. But in the beginning, it was very rough because my father was an abusive alcoholic for my entire childhood. I mean, my parents only split up when I was 10 years old. And even after that, it actually got worse because, I mean, I guess he kind of used us as pawns to like try and hurt mama too. Like, it was very weird. But I never thought of myself like as an abuse survivor. But then, like, I ended up there, and there's that saying, especially down here in the South, women marry men like their fathers, and men marry women like their mothers. I married a man the first time that was like daddy. He was an abusive alcoholic. There are still some things, like I even was talking to somebody about coercion being a form of rape the other day. And I was like, well, holy crap, I could be a rape survivor too under that criteria. And that's something that it never clicked with me until adulthood, because I didn't realize at that time that I was experiencing trauma. That was just what I always knew. That was normal. That was just life. I mean, I figured everybody kind of went through that. But even so, like, we've had that conversation where I told you that some of the things that you've been told by family members or, other people, that's emotional abuse. And that is just as real as physical abuse.
Exactly. And that's the thing like with me is I dealt with grooming growing up. I was groomed, and I didn't, at the time of the grooming, and this is something that I had to come to terms with in therapy and things like that, is
Yeah.
I didn't think it was a problem. I thought, oh, I'm an adult, because he used my innocence against me. I was groomed, so he used my innocence against me and was like, oh, you're basically being an adult and blah blah blah. This is our little secret kind of thing. And then I like get older and I'm like, wait a minute, that wasn't right. But I kept telling myself, oh, it couldn't have been that bad because I wasn't like physically touched. I wasn't like,
I say
anything like that. But
the
it
survivors
still,
tend to make excuses for it. Like, okay, yeah, it wasn't that bad. Like, other people have experienced worse, so I wasn't abused. We tend to make excuses.
oh yeah, and I definitely had that issue in terms of myself because I was like, well, I said it wasn't like I said no to it or anything, and then talking to my therapist, she's like, well, Zelda, you didn't ask, you couldn't have consented to any of that. You're
Yeah.
just a child, and for to be shown the things that I was shown and to experience what I experienced, I couldn't have consented. And so that was something I had to come to terms with, was wait a minute, no, I wasn't actually like raped or anything like that, but I did go through things that a child shouldn't have gone through, and it was a form of at the least grooming, so it was
Yeah.
something to.
Yeah. And actually, I want to go to the comments because Fluby actually asked a great question. Can grief affect psychology and the brain, especially when one is nurtured? I think grief and trauma, I mean, like any other emotion and everything, these are very subjective things. It's going to vary from person to person. But I think when you have healthy people in your life that, like, we can use the tiny tyrant, for example, like she experienced massive trauma for her age and everything. But we were able to recognize that, and we got her professional help like right off the bat.
Yeah.
So I think that that's something that, when properly dealt with, like grief and trauma and all of these things, yes, it was very negative what happened to her, but I don't think that that's something she's necessarily going to hold on to, because she has learned how to cope with it. You learn how to deal with it. Like, yes, this happened to me, but this does not have to define me.
Yeah.
And that's a key thing. And a lot of people don't learn that, I don't think.
Yeah.
Because they're never properly.
She was able to grow from it and actually be stronger because of it. But that was because she was brave enough to actually let us know what was going on and take that step forward as well.
Yeah, I mean, and
to get the help. So
this is something not most people know, but I mean, she had started experimenting with self-harm, and just the step that it took for her to like show us the marks on her body and everything, that's how we knew how serious it was. Like, okay, this is like an external manifestation of these feelings that she does not know how to process. So we're going to try to help her process these, and we're going to bring in somebody that is professional, that knows how to deal with this kind of stuff. Like when you can actually acknowledge your trauma and your grief and say, okay, I need help coping with this.
Yeah.
That's a huge step. And again, most people I don't think really are equipped to do that, because I think so many people are told we're supposed to, like, it, it's nobody else's business. Like, keep it to yourself. It's
Right.
especially men. And I think that's why men actually commit suicide more often than women do, because y'all are told to man up, suck it up, like just push it down, like you're not supposed to show emotion, things
And
like
that's
that.
something I need to hate for men, is the fact that they're,
Yeah.
because that leads to more suppression. Is a psychological coping mechanism that a negative one that leads to worse mental health states. And so that's something I respect,
It would
though.
be
I was going to say,
denial. It would be
yeah,
denial, wouldn't it? Yeah.
and that's something I respect, or I was going to say I respect about you and Dana, was that y'all got the Tiny Tyrant help and y'all said, wait a minute, there's something going on that we need to address. Because I feel like I've kind of had the opposite experience of, like, there was stuff going on with me since I was about 11 years old. This sense of like, um, okay, just not feeling emotions the way that other people were doing, these spiraling out of control moments, these anxious moments. And I wasn't given that help, because there is that stigma of mental health, and that stigma of we can't, we don't want to put her in a crazy bin kind of thing. So I've just
Right.
now gotten to the place where I can process these emotions and can say, wait a minute, you know the things that I've been through are not easy things, but I need to figure out who I am, and I need to figure out how I can get past these things and that kind of thing. And that's something that I deeply praise you and Daniel for, is that y'all looked at your daughter and did the thing that is probably unpopular, and said, we're gonna get her help.
Yeah, I mean, that was probably one of the hardest things as parents we've ever been through so far, and I pray that's all that's going to come our way. Like,
Yeah.
knock on wood and everything. I pray that's the hardest thing we're ever going to have to go through.
A lot of parents of the boomers or elder Gen X parents, stuff like that, come from that age line there. To have
Mental health is
mental
very
health
stigmatized.
issue is stigmatized, but it's something that if your child was to come to you with an issue, I'm not saying all of them, but there's a lot of them that would see that as a failure upon themselves, as failure as a parent in some way, and they
took
would
it personally.
Yeah, and they would take it personally, and
Yeah.
that would come out as denial or even anger. Or things like that, where they have a hard time accepting that maybe something they done or didn't do is
Either
what's caused
contributed to
the issues.
I think that was part of my family's problem, but I also think the other issue, in my case at least, is I'm already disabled. And I think that this applies to, plenty of kids with not only the conditions that I have, but other physical conditions. Is you have these physical conditions, and so your family, for example, I have CP, cerebral palsy, and it was from a stroke in my mom's womb, all this kind of stuff. But anyway, saying that, I already have these physical conditions: epilepsy, CP, scoliosis, all these things. And so my family's like, if we put this label of mental health on her, of poor mental health, and of having these mental health issues, then that means she's got even more labels she has to handle, rather than seeing it as, okay, we're getting her help, and we're finding the problem and getting it at its source. It's kind of like, okay, well, now we're attaching more labels and more things she's going to have to struggle with. If we just deny
And
it, then
we
it's not there.
attach stigma to those labels, so they thought it would be a bad thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I know we're at the top of the second hour now, but this actually goes back to now the nature versus nurture, because I mean, I'm sure everybody here in the chat and everything, everybody listening, me and you have talked about trauma that we've experienced, grief that we've experienced. If violent behavior, especially in like the serial killers, the mass murderers, everything that we talk about on this show, if that was strictly nurture, then like why don't people like us experience the same thing? Like why am I not a violent person? And don't make a joke about that.
I'm not making a joke about it. Yeah,
shopping list.
The shopping
No, that was a grocery list. Leave me alone.
Sure it was.
Yeah, get it right, Rick. It's a grocery list, not a shopping list.
Same difference.
But say,
anyway.
you got a little smirk. Like he's sitting there like, yeah, it totally was a grocery list. He has to go to bed with me at night, so.
That's right.
So anyway, since we came back around to the nature versus nurture, I thought this might be a good time to bring mine up. So my daughter, who is from my first marriage, who is now about to be 20, actually just turned 29. I left her mom when she was 2 because of some issues with malnourishment and everything else that came up along the way, because I was working all the time and found out she wasn't doing the things that she was supposed to. And then my family came in and tried to help because I was working all the time, and it still didn't get any better. So eventually, to save my kids, I left. So, interesting side note, she's seen the woman who is her biological mother 5 times in her entire life, and she's 29 years old. She has some of the exact mannerisms of her mother, and she's only seen her 5 times. Like my ex-wife would eat sandwiches one-handed and turn them upside down. It's the only person I've ever seen in my life that has done that, and my daughter does it.
And your daughter would have no way of having learned that behavior.
No, none.
That
At least
goes
not to a
back
point where she could be able to consciously remember it.
Yeah.
That goes back
That's
to like the
wild.
twin, and why they do twin studies is because if you have a twin that's adopted and then you have a twin that's like, you know, that's raised home people that either in another adopted home or in the family of the people who gave birth to those twins, you see that there's are mannerisms and similarities that you're like, wait a minute, you know, I didn't teach this child that. I didn't, or these two twins, even though they're separated, have these exact same personalities, or whatever. That's kind of what that falls under, is these twin studies and why they do them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've got some little cousins, nephews, whatnot. Right here, somebody just mentioned their nephew, just like his dad. It's a spiritual connection. But I've got some little cousins, nephews that are just like their granddad, like the way they stand, the way they look, but just the way they, a lot of times, the way they stand, their mannerisms, even some of the food cravings that they have. And these little kids have never met their grandfather.
I need to later on shoot Rick and Z a message, because the tiny tyrant, when she was a baby, on her right hand, she would suck these middle 2 fingers, just put them both in her mouth, and she would actually tap her nose with her pointer finger while sucking on those fingers. It was like sucking thumb, just one of those self-soothing things that babies do. Well, apparently my older cousin, Sarah, she used to do the same thing too. And then her daughter, who is 2 years older than the tiny tyrant, she did the exact same thing. Sucked the exact same fingers.
The tapping nose, all of
exactly
the same.
Like, and that had to be like daddy's side of the family, because that's where, you know, on that side.
Yeah.
So
I think the nature side of it, there's definitely a lot there. That's
I mean, there are genetic components to this, and I think that genetic components on the nature side of it make somebody more susceptible to the negative nurturing. Which is what we see in the serial killers and the mass murderers and the spree killers and all these other people.
Well,
like,
it's like Jeffrey Dahmer. His mother had.
She was on medication when she was
schizophrenia. Is that what it is?
I don't know if she was ever officially diagnosed with anything.
Well, she was on medication.
Yeah,
so
she was on psychotropic medication and everything while she was pregnant with him.
Exactly. So
and obviously that changes the chemistry of the brain. So as he's forming in the womb, she's on these strong medications. And she never actually was very nurturing towards him anyway. She was towards his younger brother.
Right.
Like, she actually, when he graduated high school, he was 17 years old. You know, dad left and everything. So it was just them in the house, mom, little brother, and Jeffrey. then mom takes the little brother and leaves Jeffrey. Like, doesn't even take him. Like, she doesn't even consider him at all. So
with him, you've got probably some nature issues from the get-go, and then you add on top of that the nurture side of it too.
It was a perfect storm.
Yeah.
I mean,
y'all, it sounds like would be, if you were to put people like on a, whether they're, nature or nurture side, y'all would be more a nativist that would say like, okay, the genetics, the genetics are there, and then once you, have these genetics, the learning stuff, or the learning stuff kind of is a second thought, or kind of comes after, or that kind of thing. Whereas I'm more of an empiricist that says, the opposite.
There are even some serial killers that, perfectly normal childhoods and everything. I had one in mind, but he slips my mind now. Perfectly normal childhood. I mean, no issues at school. Family didn't come from a broken home or anything, but he just was a serial killer. So, like, you have some examples where it seems, it just appears outwardly that it's all nature. It's just, this is how this person was from the start. They just were wired differently, maybe. But I think for me, where I stand on it, like, I think there is probably a genetic predisposition in play, and maybe nothing ever happens and they grow up to be completely normal. But you also see people that come from families with mood disorders, mental disorders, and everything, who were severely abused and everything, and they never commit any crimes either. So, like, you can't. For me, it's not one or the other.
Yeah, it's you're more like modern psychologists who say that it's interplay, which is kind of where I stand. I'm just more of an empiricist, but that's the thing, is like I definitely, it's fascinating though to think about this notion that some people come from homes of mental illness and things like that, and then they're perfectly fine, and then you have people that come from perfect homes, or not perfect homes, but as perfect as a parent can be, and they end up being serial killers. So it's kind of like, it's I think that proves the idea that there's an interplay between the two, because you can't, if we're just genetics, for example, then a person that, had a genetic predisposition but grew up in a nice home would automatically be a serial killer. And if it were just learning, it would be like these people that grew up in abusive homes would be serial killers. So it's kind of it's almost like playing dice or something. Like you throw the dice and you're like, okay, how's it going to turn out in terms of this lottery?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's what's so scary about these people too, is because you can't predict it. Like, you can look at certain people. There's a boy I went to school with. I'll call him JD for his initials and everything, because I don't want to give out too much information. But I was telling them the other day, like, at my school was so big that we had first and second load bus riders at the end of the day, because they would have to take, like, some kids in the first wave, then come back and get the next ones and take them home on the bus and everything. So me and my best friend at the time, we're standing there in the lobby. We're just, hanging around waiting, just what we always do. And I hear this click behind me, and I smell burning at the time. So I turn around and I look, and JD is standing behind me with a lighter in his hand, and he has tried to light my hair on fire in the lobby of the school. Well, that dude was always very, very weird. Like, he was always in trouble, always in the counselor or the principal's office. I mean, he was always doing something that was very weird. He was not right.
We just called that flirting in my day.
Shut up. 3 years Oh, no, yeah, 3 years because it was 2008. I graduated in 05. So 3 years after graduation, I find out on the news that this boy has killed both of his grandparents, murdered them in their home because he was living with them. And I was like, dude, like this guy tried to light my hair on fire at school one time.
Mm-hmm.
That's terrifying.
Yeah.
And now there are people like that all the time that like you can see like, okay, there's something wrong about this person. They've got some emotional issues and there's something going on. But then there are completely normal people or that are outwardly normal that you think are normal. And they do horrific things too. It's just the unpredictability of it that terrifies me.
We mentioned it in the previous show too. It's like, how many times have you walked by a person like that in your daily life?
Grocery shopping, like how many people do I walk by? There was that day me and the Tiny Tyrant were grocery shopping, and that older man, I saw him in every single aisle that we walked down. And finally, like over in the dairy section or something, he walks up and starts talking about how pretty she is and everything. So I left my buggy there. I went up front and I said, you need to get me a manager right now. So I was like, y'all need to walk us to our car because I'm leaving right now.
Yeah.
But how many people that don't ever act like that? Do you walk past that maybe have somebody like tied up in their basement or something? Like, it's terrifying.
That's the fascinating thing is like my ex, he would like apparently like abuse animals when he was a kid, but like, and you hear about
part
like
of the McDonald triad.
You hear about these like these serial killers that abuse animals and stuff, and he ended up growing up like he caused a lot of mischief and that kind of thing, but he grew up and I mean he's a jerk, but he grew up and is not harming people and stuff. So it's like you have that, it's again, it's a game of like dice, of chance, of however you want to describe it, of like these people that you think, okay, that's going to be a serial killer, that's going to be and then they turn out to be like a CEO or somebody awesome, and then you have this person that you're like, okay, that person's going to be like the straight A student, the star of the basketball team, whatever, and then you find out they've killed like 5 different women or something. Like it just like it. That's my
fact,
point.
though. You mentioned the CEOs. It's estimated, I think, in the U.S. about 1% to 2% of the U.S. population is actually clinically psychopathic, and overwhelmingly, they tend to be CEOs or politicians.
Yeah.
Somebody in like positions of power like that.
Oh yeah, that was a complete coincidence, but you're right. That is actually true. These positions of power and these positions of control and manipulation and things like that tend to be more psychopathic.
Yeah, they gravitate towards those careers.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and that's the thing with antisocial personality disorder, is one of the stereotypes of it is, and that's what the psychologist that y'all played talked about, is there's a stereotype that a lot of them are criminals and like all that kind of stuff, but a lot of like CEOs and very successful people may have it. You're more likely to break the law and have a disregard for others when you have antisocial personality disorder, but it doesn't mean you're going to become a criminal automatically.
Right. Yeah, most people that are either psychopathic or sociopathic, I mean, they don't tend to be violent. I mean, usually the control over others is just through manipulation or, coercion, things like that. I mean, it's not good, obviously. Like, it doesn't make them a good person or anything, but they don't typically kill people for it.
Yeah, I mean, politicians. I hate all politicians. I mean, there's a point right there to be said. But go ahead, Daniel. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say that they share so many things in common that could just be, that one ingredient missing to push them over to one way or the other. It's interesting to see, like, let's take somebody like Ted Bundy, if he had a different nurture aspect in just one or two places, No, he could wind up being a surgeon or owner of his
somebody who
own.
did something good.
Oh yeah. Which
I
one
mean,
was
that's
it?
But even then, Ted Bundy, I think the trauma of finding that out, like I talked about earlier, was a catalyst.
Mm-hmm.
It's that focal point. The women in his
that's
life
what
all lied to him.
Right.
And,
I've
especially the
researched.
woman that he was engaged to. So,
I've researched like Ted Bundy a little bit, not definitely on the scale that Laura has, but I've researched him a little bit because true crime to some extent fascinates me, but not like her level. So, but
not that anybody's on my level with that. It's concerning, I think, to a lot of people.
But with Ted Bundy, the judge actually told him like how it was basically his life was wasted. Like when he was sentenced to be executed, how his life was he could have taken a completely different path, and how I think that judge even said like I would have loved to have you as a like as a law clerk or something like that. He said, but you took such a wrong dark path, and how it was a waste of life.
Yeah, he was actually in law school to become an attorney. Like he was going to be a lawyer. He was an up and comer with the local Republican Party too. So I mean, this man could have become like district attorney, something major. But I mean, he did turn out to be something major, just not in a good way.
He could become president.
And that's the terrifying thing when you think about it. Is like, hey, this guy was really close to having a good, at least a decent amount of power. And if he wouldn't have been found out, he could have been like, as you said, like an attorney general or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, he even in at least one of his cases, in one of his trials, represented himself. Hired his actual attorneys and represented himself.
Yeah, he fired his attorneys because he didn't like. I think he felt they were incompetent or something.
Well, that they didn't necessarily like. He kept saying that he was innocent, and I don't think that they believed him. And so he was like, "Well, if you don't believe me, I don't want you representing me." So he was like, "I can do it myself." But that always reminds me of that quote: "Like any lawyer that has himself for a client is a fool."
Yeah.
But I mean, he obviously wasn't a fool because he was able doing that. One of his escapes from jail was actually during his trial because he was given access to the law library, and as his own attorney, he was granted privacy. So then he just went out the window one day. Nobody's in there with him to supervise him, so he just jumps out a window.
And what's frightening about Ted Bundy, one of the things that like just blows my mind when I read about Ted Bundy and that kind of thing, and I know we're not focusing on him specifically, but it does go back to this sense of manipulation and power and stuff like that psychopaths have, is that people like women would be on TV, because I think his was like the first televised, at least big trial, and so women would be on TV saying like, "Oh, he's so handsome. He couldn't have done this," kind of thing. And it's like, this is a serial killer, my dude. Like, you don't.
I think he was the first serial killer that changed the public perspective of them, because we always think of dangerous people like they're these like hunched over, like ugly, ungroomed, unkempt men. That you would just know when you looked at them. Yeah. But he wasn't. He was attractive. He was charming. I mean, he got married in prison. He impregnated his wife while on. It wasn't even a conjugal visit. He just knew that some of the security cameras didn't record, like they couldn't see around a certain corner of a vending machine. So he took his wife back beside a vending machine and got her pregnant. Just during one of the visits.
They say romance is dead.
Oh my God.
I think what's
you better buy me the good stuff out of the vending machine.
I think what's only the full size candy bars.
Yeah.
I think what's the most tragic thing about Ted Bundy too, and you look at the nature and nurture part of it, is like I said, he could have been really good person, and could have done great things. And you can't blame his family altogether because Ted's brother Al went on to become a great guy. He sold shoes for a living, but he had a good family.
God.
He had a good family life as a shoe salesman, had his own house. And his brother Al was an upright citizen. So
yeah, the next episode, y'all are going to see him with duct tape across his mouth.
It's not my fault. It come from Mr. Rass right there.
Yeah, I know. But, y'all feed off each other sometimes with the jokes.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's like they've been spamming I am Groot in the chat for God knows how long.
Yeah, I've been seeing that too.
I've been trying to stay on track because of
Yes, women are very weird. We could actually go to some female serial killers or like the Eileen Wuornos. Hers, I think, I don't know a lot about, I don't think she was ever really studied psychologically, but nurture played a very big part in Eileen Wuornos' crimes.
Isn't she the one that she would kill somebody every 27, 28 days?
No.
Is that not
That's going to be me if you're not careful.
I think it was definitely, I think that the trauma in her, to her, I mean, I say
that trauma, I think, broke her.
Yeah.
She already lived such a hard life. I mean, she became a prostitute as a very early teenager. I think she was like the Tiny Tyrant's age.
She was 15 was when she was first arrested for the first time. So,
but that means she was doing it well before then too.
Yeah, most likely, yeah.
But I mean, obviously that implies a very bad home life.
Oh, she even said she said as much too. Like it was happening at home, so why not get paid for it? And that's all she knew.
That's just God, how awful. Oh.
That's how she got away from it, and that's all she knew. So, that's the one.
It pains me to think that our own daughter's age is already thinking like that.
Yeah,
that's insane.
That's one that I blame that totally on nurture for what come through what she went through.
We have no idea her psychological profile or anything because I don't know of any studies. That nothing comes to mind.
If you look at what she went through, then the
PTSD.
If you look at what she went through growing up, and then her crimes on what she did, they mirror each other. They hand in hand.
Yeah.
You can go from point A to point B and tie
very clear
a direct line to what happened to what she did. And I think it's sad.
You see all those.
I feel bad for her.
You see all those memes about the maps and everything with the strings connecting all the different things.
Yeah.
No, hers is A, B, one string. There it is.
Yeah, that's pretty easy to find. That's her story. I mean, she was so broken by the end of it.
She was raped as a child and then brutally raped again as an adult and everything. All that came back each time she was with somebody. Her murders were made by just needing to survive. She needed money.
Well, her job was that because she didn't kill every John she had because there was something with each one of her victims that triggered that reaction. So except for that one guy who was legitimately giving her a ride home and she killed him.
That's the one body that was never found too.
But still, even in that case, there could have been something that triggered it, that caused it. I don't think
a smell, a song on the radio. I mean, anything.
I was just about to say that's how PTSD works. Is any one of any maybe a food that you eat, maybe or that you were force fed, maybe a sound that you hear, a smell that anything your brain associates, and that's can trigger these episodes of flashbacks and
and you're right back in that trauma. Exactly. In your mind, you're literally right back in it.
Exactly. And that's what people don't understand about PTSD, with veterans and stuff. Let's say they hear a gunshot and they think, or they hear maybe their neighbors are shooting ducks or something, and they hear a gunshot and they immediately they're not in that living room hearing that gunshot or whatever. They're in the war zone, in Afghanistan or wherever, getting fired at. Your brain takes you right back to that. It's terrifying, but it's also it's weirdly fascinating because it brings us to the idea of how our brain uses things to cope, like dissociative identity disorder. That's a highly contested uh, uh, mental illness, and I genuinely believe it's a true thing because
Oh, it absolutely is.
yeah, it's very rare, but the brain will do. It's like when it doesn't have time to form the full identity, this cohesive identity, the brain will do anything to
Usually
protect itself.
with DID, and yeah, they used to call it multiple personality disorder, but today is dissociative identity disorder. This always in every case that has been documented as being for real, in every single case, it has stemmed from severe childhood abuse, either physical, sexual, or even religious abuse. It always starts very, very young in childhood.
Oh yeah, because I mean, obviously you can't read or believe everything you read or see on the internet, but like I've seen YouTubers with genuine dissociative identity disorder. These aren't people that are faking, because I've seen the fakes and that kind of thing, but like these like this one YouTuber, I'm not going to say who she is, but she has dissociative identity disorder and she uses her platform to help others, but you've seen these switches on camera of like whether it's a sound or a smell or whatever, and sometimes she's like a child because her brain is regressed to that childhood trauma. Other times she's like, she's more of like a guy because maybe she feels like that trauma wouldn't have happened if she were a guy, kind of thing. So
Well,
it's
that
just
and the trauma, like a child does not know how to deal with such severe trauma like that. So they kind of, what I've always said, and like Daniel can vouch for this, I've said that multiple personality or dissociative identity is like an imaginary friend on crack. Like,
yeah,
your brain you can't at that age cope with what's happening to you. You have no resources for this. You have no coping mechanisms. So you create this entire other person essentially to take on what you're experiencing, and you just disassociate completely, and Bob is enduring it for you.
Yeah, exactly. That's how it works. In a simpler way, that is how it works. And that's the thing, is it's transference on, like you were saying, on crack. It's transference on steroids. You're taking. Let's say you see as a child when you're being abused, you might watch a Disney movie, and Belle comes on screen, so you bring Belle to life, and she's one of these alters, and these alters take that abuse and take that trauma for you, and
it's a persona that you feel could deal with it.
Exactly. It's somebody in some way is meant to protect you, or to there's even with DID, there's persecutors that put that trauma back on you because they feel like you deserve it in some way, or it's a form of in some way it's a form of coping. But in the case of like persecutors, it's like you're putting that trauma on yourself. So it's quite fascinating what the brain.
Okay. I was actually talking about this earlier too on Twitter about how these issues and everything, the nature and nurture, it goes back to that. Like, would it be considered nature, like if a child is sexually abused for a long, long time? Because we know that sexual abusers that were abused in childhood, they overwhelmingly repeat that abuse. They do it themselves to other children as they become adults. Would that be more nature, or would that be nurture?
I think that'd be a nurture thing, because
that's all they learned about intimacy from a very early age, and
it's somebody else. I mean, it's.
So hold on, repeat that one more time, because I want to hear that so I can give my judgment. And, very professional.
We know that people who were sexually abused as children, overwhelmingly, like in the majority of cases, if you were sexually abused as a child, especially in males, if they were sexually abused as a child, they go on as adults to repeat that pattern of abuse. So would that be more nature? Like, would that be something ingrained in them? or would that be something that was imprinted on them through their experiences?
I think that's definitely nurture, or that's environmental. Let me use that term. It's environmental and developmental,
Yeah,
because
see, that would be more the nurture then. That's
yeah,
where I stand on it too. So
because if you're dealing, nature is just genetics, biology, the way the brain is formed, things like that.
yeah,
um
just the hard wiring.
yes, the hardwiring. Whereas nurture is how you develop your experiences through childhood and through adulthood and things like that. So when you're talking about sexual abuse and these abuse victims that go on to abuse other people, that would be an example of nurture.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's definitely a nurture thing. But I think too, especially during the formative years, because I mean, we know the brain development doesn't end until roughly about age 25 in adults. But between like birth and what, maybe 10 years old, let's say the first 10 years after birth, these are when the brain is actually making more of the big developments and everything. So I think that trauma, it goes back to that conversation too. Trauma is actually going to adjust, I guess, how your brain processes these things. So
Exactly.
then the way you end up thinking about them, like that nurture thing could end up being a nature that is passed down maybe genetically to the next generation if they have children.
But that's the thing when it comes we were just talking about DID. You were talking about how the brain is forming so much during that first 10 years. That's why one of the criteria, because as you said, it used to be called multiple personality disorder, but they changed it dissociative identity disorder because of the dissociation and the fact that it's more of a dissociative thing rather than like a personality thing. And so, but that first, not the correct one of the criteria is you had to have gone, or you have to have some experience that causes you to not be able to form a single cohesive identity before the age of like
Right.
70.
But I say
And
those
so
other personalities are still the person's core personality. They have just consciously or subconsciously split it off in a different way, I guess.
oh,
It
it's
still is that person, is how they is part of their personality, but they don't experience it as just one single cohesive person.
oh,
I guess.
it's definitely parts of the person's personality. I don't think they do it consciously, because
Yeah.
I think it's something completely subconscious. It's just the brain's way of coping. It's like when
Well, that's
I
where the dissociative part comes in of that disorder, because usually people where it has been documented that it is real, they disassociate and they have what they call fugue states or blackouts. Like they have no conscious memory of what they've done or said or interacted with other people. They have no conscious memory of this because they disassociated.
yes, they disassociate, they become amnesic, and then they have these amnesic walls between, like, some alters may know about one, and one other alter, and then that other alter may not know about them, though, because they have these amnesic walls, and that's why it's no longer a personality disorder. So
Some of the things, like, I don't know if you've ever read the book Sybil, but there's another one, Sybil Unveiled, which is really good. But it does actually bring up a pervasive theme when dealing with dissociative identity disorder, that there tends to be one dominant personality that is aware of all the other personalities, even if those other personalities and the main person is not consciously aware of it. But there is one personality that does tend to
the
be the
problem
boss, basically.
the problem with Civil is actually, from what I've read, and I may be wrong, is that's not actually that they found out that she didn't actually have
Yeah,
DID.
that's where I said read the book Sybil Unveiled. which I think is the name of it. Because they go into that. They kind of like take it point by point and everything. No, this woman was never strapped to a piano leg while her mother played and forced to take ice water enemas and hold it while her mother played. Like, none of this stuff ever happened. So
Yeah. But
There's-
oh, sorry. Go ahead, Daniel.
There's a good representation of that in a movie that's M. Night Shyamalan movie. It's
Which
called
one?
It's called Split,
oh, I love that movie.
and
That's
it's
good.
got. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I keep interrupting. I was just gonna say that movie is actually condemned by those with dissociative identity disorder and by clinicians because it takes, even though yes, it shows the split personalities and things like that. It actually shows the DID sufferer as being violent in one of his personalities, multiple of his personalities, and a lot of people with DID included, but even mental health issues overall, tend not to be violent. It's actually the opposite. They tend to be more likely to be
It's
victims.
turned inward usually.
Yeah.
Self-harm.
So you have these persecutor alters and things like that. It's self-harm. It's like self-blame, things like that. So Split is actually it's considered it's good cinema probably, but it's not useful as a learning tool.
Yeah.
I hope they don't actually use it since it's a made-up movie. But the representation of it is extremely good for people to. If you listen to the show thinking exactly what they're talking about, look at that movie Split. It's a good representation of it. And McAvoy, the actor that played the part, I mean, he was phenomenal in it.
That was good.
It's
definitely not a learning tool. It's not a documentary in the slightest. Like, it is a fictional movie. And I think every movie out there that, like, okay, one of my favorite movies about this topic is a John Cusack movie called Identity. And I've made you watch that. I actually watched it the other night again. But, I mean, I'm not going to spoil that one, but yeah, any kind of Hollywood dramatization of this condition, it's always going to be very dramatic. It's always going to be very dark. Like, I mean,
over the top.
Yeah. But Hollywood is Hollywood. So, yeah, I think everybody knows not to really take that seriously. Like, this is not a documentary. So,
yeah, it's not like Abraham Lincoln hunting the vampire slayer.
God.
Now, that documentary that is a great documentary. Y'all have to check that one. I was very impressed with it.
But that's the thing is, Fluby said it best in the comments. He said Hollywood does not represent disorders very well, and that's how DID, especially DID, is portrayed as like somebody just goes off the rails and decides to become violent. And it's like, no, you have these various alters, and they each have a part to play, mainly in protecting the person from themselves.
Yeah, it's a form of like shielding them from whatever trauma that they can't cope with, and even as adults, like in real life, that carries on into adulthood. They have never learned how to cope with maybe grief or anger or anything like that. So that personality comes out whenever they feel that emotion because they themselves never learned how to properly cope with it.
And that's I think when it comes to trauma, a lot of mental disorders that somebody develops are coping mechanisms. For example, I have bipolar disorder. Bipolar 2 probably, or bipolar not otherwise specified, either one. But I have bipolar disorder, and even though it's not a coping mechanism in the way you would think of like GID or something like that, it's a coping mechanism in the sense that my brain goes on these highs to, I think, cope with the lows and to cope with follows and vice versa. The lows are to cope with the highs of like, I don't care and I've got all these ideas and, maybe I don't feel like sleeping. And then, you have the opposite with depression where that's coping for the mania where it's like, or the hypomania in my case, where it's like, oh, well, all I want to do is sleep. Everything sucks. It's hopeless because, one copes for the other and the brain tries to say, okay, well, we need these extreme mood states because we don't know how else to deal with.
That's actually
You know?
Actually, a fairly good way of thinking about it, because I have GAD, generalized anxiety disorder, and I was diagnosed as a teenager. But my anxiety, you can ask Daniel, like typically comes from things that I feel like I can't control. So I feel like, I guess, if I worry about it, if I think about it, if I fixate on it enough, I can handle it. But I end up like just making myself sick. But
Yeah.
usually, like if the tiny tyrant comes in and says like I don't feel good, ask him. Like I will spiral, because I mean, like I'm a mom, and I can give her soup, I can take care of her, I can take her to the doctor, I can do all this stuff. That's all I can control about that. Like I can't control if she gets a stomach bug or if she gets a flu or something like that, and that sends me spiraling.
It's that sense of control of the brain's need for control. That's like I have GAD, but like mine is social situations and driving and things like that. So my brain is for example, like social situations. I was bullied growing up because again, disabled, whatever. But
Yeah, I can
I
imagine you on the driving thing, especially like if I'm in an area that I'm not familiar with. That's why I make Daniel drive everywhere basically, because that's what he does for a living, and I can't do it if I'm not like in places that I don't know.
Exactly. And that's for me, like the social situations, like big crowds and people that I don't know, especially a combination of those.
Yeah,
I will just completely like, I will have these
lock up.
acts. Yeah, like where I'll cry. I feel like the walls are closing in. I'll like rock back and forth.
But say I pace a lot, but I tend to shut down and go silent. Like I don't cry, I don't show anything outwardly. But Daniel has actually learned over the years to like recognize those signs. Like if I'm just sitting there quietly, I'm not talking to anybody, and I'm just kind of looking around, he's like, "You need to leave, don't you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I need to leave."
And that's kind of how I am when I'm driving. Like I'll freeze up and just like I'm completely stiff. So it's these two different opposite reactions, but like depending on the situation. But in saying all that, like BPD, for example, again, another disorder I have where I have these rapid mood swings, and like my anxiety is like it borders. It's more self conscious, but it's like it's paranoia basically. I think that like everybody me and is everybody talking about me. It's my
The way I
brain.
describe it is like it's this low grade hum in the back of my head all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that anxiety that's always there.
Yeah, and
But
so
yeah, it's very subconscious. So I get what you're saying there.
it's this it's a self conscious feeling of like for like my BPD where it's like everybody's talking about me, everybody hates me, everybody like, and I have like suicidal thoughts and suicidal actions and things like that, and you've even experienced me in one of those spirals and helped me through it, but like, and I have extreme anger and things like that because I think it's my brain's way of coping and saying, you know I didn't get to, I had to control my emotions a lot growing up because even asking a parent why was considered disobedience. It was considered like, you don't ask me why, you don't ask me questions. I was taught to do things without, any kind of like, hey, why am I doing this? Like, what's going on? Like, anything like that. And so now I have this, these wild mood swings where my brain just goes, I need to feel, and then I feel too much, and then like
This
here's
kind
a
of thing, it goes back. This is just our nature.
exactly.
It's the biological characteristics that we just have. And
Exactly.
everybody's got something like that. It may not be as severe as like what you have, or it may not be like what I have. Like Daniel never really ever experienced anxiety until what, you had COVID and was in the hospital for 12 days.
Yeah.
You had panic attacks then. And I remember him talking to me one night after one. He said, I don't know how you do this all the time.
Yeah.
But most people, like, it's not always severe, but everybody's got some kind of biological characteristic that I guess could make them susceptible, since I think we're all in agreement that it is a combination of nature versus nurture that could turn
Yeah.
somebody into a violent killer.
And that's what I'm
I think we should all just be kind of thanking our lucky stars that despite the issues that we have, like none of this has ever put us in the news.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, like I was saying earlier, psychologists tend not to say, like, okay, nature's more important, nurture's more important. They tend to say, okay, these two work together and are about in personality disorders. One of the statistics I found is in personality disorders like antisocial personality disorder, it's more likely to be like 40 to 50% is genetic. So you have these two forces that interlock and interact with one another, but how do they interact? How do they make us up? How do
I don't think we'll ever have an answer for that, because I think for every person it's going to be different.
Oh yeah, definitely. Because some people it's a little more nature, some people it's a little more nurture, and some people it's like, yes, it's both. For everybody it's pretty much both, but like how? And then that's a complicated question that psychologists are trying to figure out.
Yeah, and I think that's just why it's always going to be a debated issue, because there's never going to be a firm black and white answer to this. Like,
well, you've got some examples too, like Bundy would be a little more nature leaning, I think. And then you've got some like Warnos, who is more nurture leaning, but they both have a combination of the nature and the nurture mixed in. It's just like I said, I don't think you can say 100% one way, 100% the other way. There's got to be a mixture in there.
Yeah, I mean, even if somebody doesn't have any kind of diagnosed mental, emotional, personality kind of disorder, I think just being human, we're all capable of horrific things. It's just a matter of, I don't know, I mean, how we view it. It's our values, it's our principles. I mean, like for me, I could never in my wildest dreams take another human life unless my life, or like Daniel's life, or the Tiny Tyrant's life, or even somebody in line with me at the grocery store. I could never take another life unless somebody else was like in imminent danger, and I would have nightmares about it afterwards.
Yeah,
because that's just the type of person that I am. Like, that's, to me, that's a big deal. And to so many of the people that like I've studied since childhood, it's so cavalier. It's just, it's like nothing to them. It's like stepping on an ant or something. Like, there's no remorse about it. There's nothing, they don't value human life at all.
Blueby asked in the chat, I wonder how much autism can affect nature and nurture. Actually, autism is one of the few cases where it's more nature, where it's more genetic, because that is a,
I can see that,
because it is a more, it's not a birth defect, but it's like a neurological disorder kind of thing. So it's more nature, and that's one of the few cases where it's like, okay, we can say this is more nature, but there still are nurture aspects, I'm sure, to it, but it is more nature.
But for autism, overwhelmingly, these are very meek and timid type people. Like, they don't want to be around others, and
they have
typically, I mean, if they do get overwhelmed and everything and lash out, they tend to hurt themselves more often than others.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, is really sad, but I'm glad that now that, this is becoming more known about. As the years go, we're learning more about autism and the different variations of it. Right. So, hopefully these children and everything, because it's usually diagnosed in childhood. Hopefully these children, have good parents that are getting them the proper help that they need. So, but I know we are getting close, so we can probably start like telling where to find everybody.
I don't know. We got a few more minutes to keep talking about it. You had brought up autism.
You got 8, and there's nothing behind you anyway. So if you want to run over, I don't care.
Talking about autism, and been on the spectrum like that, being nature versus nurture, and definitely more of a nature type setup, it made me think about the people with Down syndrome too. Because you look at folks that's got then the human nature to me, and I will always say it, human nature is not I won't say evil because that's too big of a word, but it is not inherently good.
Flawed is my usual go-to.
Yeah, it's every person is born with that. Well, let's just say sin.
I'm on that boat.
Yeah.
Every person is born with that. That's their nature. Every person is born a sinful creature, a flawed individual. We are not inherently good people. Take religion out of it. If you grow up like that, you're not. You're the human nature of it is to be. Let's hold hands and everybody get along together. It's very selfish. It's a very selfish me type first type of personality. That's just the way all nature is. Now, when you've got somebody with Down syndrome, those are I think that's the other side of that coin. What they're missing, I think, is actually a wonderful addition to them.
But no, it's an extra chromosome. So the addition, actually, that you just said is
that's what I was going to say.
Yeah,
is that because scientifically it is an addition. They have an extra chromosome, like you're saying. They're more than a normal human. They're more than I am. Because
we've talked about this a lot before. I mean, just us personally, we've known a lot of people with Down syndrome. I mean, I've even had some people in my own family that have it. These are the most pure people you will ever meet. I think they are the closest things that human beings could ever get to just being angelic.
Yeah. I worked with them, and they was there's a group that does I hate to say the word daycare, because that
assisted living
type thing for them all through their childhood and into adult lives. It gives them things that they can work in the communities. They have a big softball game every year, which is pretty awesome, and I've worked pretty closely with them for decades. And those people, I tell you what, I'm envious of them, quite honestly, because the way they see the world is just the opposite. It's like I said, it's the other side of that coin from everything you see in the news, everything we talk about every week about
the world's not a dark place for them.
About the serial killers, mass murderers, these people that's got something twisted and broken. These guys and gals with the Down syndrome they're not twisted and broken. They're together. They're more put together than anybody that I know.
Twisted and broken, they're missing something. These people, I think, have what is missing.
Like I said, they got the extra chromosome. They're more than we are.
Yeah.
I think they're better than we are.
I say these are some, like, I remember working at up at Shelby's, where I was forever, every Friday. And, I usually got there about 3 or 4 o'clock, set up for dinner and everything. But they came in early because there was hardly anybody there. It was before happy hour, all that. But he was fairly nonverbal, but he knew sign language. And anytime he would come in, the first time he did, I noticed that his mom was, using sign language with him. So even the very limited sign language that I know, I was able to talk with him. And every time I did it, that face just lit up. He was the highlight of my Fridays. Like, I don't care how bad a day I was having, whenever I saw him and was able to talk to him, like, that boy, he was magical. I mean, these are the most pure people on earth, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. And that's the thing, like, with CP, is CP, 2/3 of those with CP, which is the condition I have some form of intellectual disability. Even if it's more mild, like 1/3, it's like mild, and then like another 1/3, it's like more severe. But it just, you see these people that have this and they have these intellectual disabilities, but they're so happy, and it's like it's like Daniel said, you kind of can't help but be a little envious because you're like,
Yeah.
you have this purity of heart and this blank slate towards the world that like we could never have because we understand the sadness and the anger and the pain of it, you know?
Yeah, to them, the world is not a dark place. I mean, it may be a little scary because, I mean, obviously, just because of their disability, but it's not, the world is not a dark place like we see it. Like, I have very little happy thoughts about our culture and society and the way the world's going these days. These people don't live life that way.
No, but like I said, when it comes to nature and nurture, I do think that it has to be, in my opinion, a combination of the two, because you can't have one without the other. Really.
Yeah.
It's like when you're baking something. If you leave an ingredient out, it doesn't work out.
Yeah.
That's actually a really good analogy for it is this notion, like if you're making bread, you know, you can't make bread without you know, without yeast.
The flour, yeah.
Flour, yeah. So
yeah, I mean, I definitely think that's where I've always been. I mean, even since childhood, because obviously I've been into this topic since I was very, very little. I knew Jeffrey Dahmer's address by the time I was 9 years old. Even then, you know, thinking about this, like, are people naturally this way, or are they made this way? Like, I was thinking about that kind of crap when I was a kid. So, but it always had a combination to me. It was the only thing that ever made sense.
Yeah, and that's like clinical psychology, which is because you were more into the forensic, like criminals and things like that. I, you know, growing up as a teenager, because I always knew inherently that there was something, like in terms of my emotional state, my psychological state, that there was something a little different. Like I knew, and I kind of blamed myself for it, but I was also like, okay, there's something going on. Like I'm not feeling. I'm a lot of the times, like the depression stuck out to me the most, and so I would do a lot of researching into these like medical studies and into these different mental illnesses and things like that. Not just like antisocial personality disorder, but mood disorders, schizophrenia, things like that. Not just because, you know, not because like I thought I had schizophrenia or anything, and not because I necessarily thought I had these disorders, but because especially after I was diagnosed, I was like, I want to help people with these disorders. I want to give them the treatment that I didn't get until later on, you know, and so it was that inherent curiosity. So I can relate to that to an extent.
Yeah, that's what I tell people all the time. Like, I'm not fascinated with this subject because I'm into gore, I'm into violence, or, you know, murder makes me happy. No, like, it's always been like, how could one human being do this to another human being? What drives this? Like, what makes them do this?
Yeah.
And no, there's never going to be an answer to that. I mean, I know there's not, but
yeah, we've talked about that too. That sometimes when it comes to us going through these stories and doing our research for our regular shows, that
we have to take a step back.
That a lot of times I'm one that reads through the details of the case and the crimes, because that doesn't interest you. I mean, you'll do it,
yeah,
but you'd rather you read it.
I go for the background. I want to see like what happened like early on, see if there's any kind of clues there.
What got them to that point? So,
but I remember, was it last episode or episode before, we were talking about David Parker Ray, and you didn't know about what I call the orientation tape that he played for his victims.
I didn't know. I had never listened to it all the way through, but yeah, I knew about it.
But you actually did try to play a little bit of it, and even you were like, I can't get through this. I've listened to it one time in its entirety, and that's all I can stomach.
It took me several plays to get through it, but I had to walk away from it.
And we will do an episode on David Parker Ray, but that's going to take a lot of emotional prep work for me, because he's easily one of the worst, I think.
I think so too.
And I think I don't know enough about his background because I just don't dive into that case very much for that reason. But I don't know. I mean, to me, unless he was severely sexually abused as a child, you don't get that way unless it's just your nature. Like, unless you just have something inside you that needs that.
It'll be interesting to look into that because he had accomplices too, which, I mean,
I still love that name though, Cindy Hendy.
Yeah, just for him to be as depraved as he was doing, to find someone who would play along with it too.
I'm about to say, I mean, as much as I love you, like if anything ever came to that, I'll kill you myself. Yeah. Like, it just won't get that bad. But
that's what's interesting, Laura, is you said, forensic psychology, you enjoy it because of the how do these people come to this, why does somebody act the way that they do and that kind of thing. And that drives a lot of psychology as a whole. And even like my point of view of clinical psychology, it's a lot of why do we get to the point of mental illnesses? How do we get to these points? What, biopsychology or behavioral neurosciences, it's also called, deals with a lot of that as well. Is like, here's how the brain forms, here's how it looks during mental disorders and things like that. So I think that applies to a lot of psychology as a whole. Is why do we act like this? How do we get to this point? Why as individuals do our personalities and thinking and all of that come to where it is?
Yeah, I've always said that if I didn't want to get us into like insurmountable debt, I would go back to school, and I would go back to school doing what you do, psychology. I mean, I probably would go into more of the criminology and forensic psychology aspect of it after that, but it's essentially just different parts of the same exact field. Like clinical psychology is core there, and then there are just these little branches off of it.
It's like engineering, how there's different parts of engineering. Yeah. It's pretty much the same thing. It's different parts to this one whole.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's all branches of the same thing.
And they also interlock too. Like, you can't study forensic psychology without studying a little bit of the clinical psychology. You can't study clinical psychology without getting into a little bit of the forensic psychology. For example, like, because there are people with antisocial personality disorder and, these mental health disorders. So it that have these mental health disorders and things like that. So they all interlock in some way.
Sorry, Dixie is getting whiny with us, so he's putting him up. She's ready to go to bed.
She's like, parents, where are you?
I say she's back there behind us, like yelling at us now. Like, hey, it's time to go.
She's about to start getting real loud. So.
I say, when Fat Mama wants to go to bed, it is time for her to go to bed.
I think we about covered everything we wanted to cover. We're getting real close to starting to go in circles now.
Yeah.
So we got 2 hours into it. So
yeah, just about. Yeah. A little over. So
I had mentioned at the beginning of the show, before everybody joined us, we got a pretty good crowd listening now, but we're changing the name of the podcast. It's not going to be Talk Murder to Me anymore.
Yeah, there were some already established podcasts with the same name. So we didn't want to cause any confusion or even copyright issues. Nothing.
If you was to look up and search them on like Spotify or iHeartRadio or whatever podcast streamer, those shows would come up first because they're more established. One of them had 300 episodes already. Yeah. So we talked it over and decided that although we like that name, obviously other people do too. So we figured something that would fit us more better.
Personally.
Yeah, I like more better. What we would do because normally we do this on the front porch. Right now, where we live at, it's pretty hot. And we don't want to have to fight the mosquitoes and whatnot to do the show. So we decided to change the name of the show to the Front
Porch Forensics.
Yeah, Front Porch Forensics.
I like that.
It's the same show, same thing. We're
Yeah.
not changing nothing other than the name.
Yeah, and eventually this is actually our first episode doing the video.
Yeah.
But once like the weather cools off and it's not unbearable outside, like we'll be out on our front porch since Daniel got it built and we've got it kind of set up the way we like it with the lights and everything. So we'll be outdoors in nicer weather on our front porch. So
once you see the name change and all that next show in 2 weeks, it's still us,
well,
so
we'll be putting out posts too.
Oh, for
and
sure. Yeah.
I'm going to change our Twitter page, which right now is Talk Murder to Me with the number 2. But I'll be changing the handle and changing the screen name and everything for that probably tonight, I think. But we'll be putting all that out and just kind of reminding everybody that the name is changing, but nothing else is.
Right. Nothing else is going to change.
So.
But other than that, I mean, Zelda, if you want to share with everybody
where we can find you,
and that'd be great.
So first of all, a little bit of self plug. I'll be coming out with the poetry book in a couple of weeks.
I'm excited, and I got to get my signed copy because it's going to go with my other signed first edition. So,
it's a poem book that it'll come out in the next like couple of weeks or so. But if you want to keep up with that and all my shenanigans and even ask me questions about psychology or whatever, just follow me at Zelda and Gabriel.
I'll pistol whip the next guy.
What did he say?
Was that a recording? What was that?
I swear to God, I'll pistol whip the next guy that says shenanigans.
Why did you do that?
Because you said shenanigans.
Zelda, don't you have a show coming up too pretty soon?
Yes, actually, now that you mention it, thank you for reminding me. Laura and I, that is Bumpstock Barbie, the wonderful woman that is doing this, and I will be co-hosting a show. We're bringing it to KLRN with Rick's help and all that kind of stuff. It's called TFC or Total Freaking Chaos. I'm not going to say the word because,
We have a disclaimer. It's total fucking chaos.
Okay, it's total fucking chaos, but it's or TFC as we call it, and basically it's once a month for from 3 to 5 p.m. Central Time. It's basically we just hear your wild stories, hear your crazy thoughts, all that kind of stuff, and then kind of discuss it and just kind of take a reprieve from all the negativity. So.
Oh yeah, it's pure fun. I mean,
it is so much fun.
Everybody needs that break. So
yeah, I'm looking forward for that too.
I say we always have a good time on that one, and you're gonna have to actually put it out on KLRN your plans when you win the lottery now. So
I'll see for that one. Yeah, that'll be fun. Well, where can they find you at?
I am Bumpstock Barbie, and we have like I said, it's going to change soon, but we have the Talk Murder to Me Twitter page too, and 2 is just the number 2. But you can also find me over at Twitchy, and I have my author page linked in my bio on Twitter, so you can find me there too.
Yeah, I just Bumpstock Ken on X. I do this show every other Saturday.
Yeah, every other Saturday for
now. Like I said, it's about to change to the Front Porch Forensics.
Yeah.
And you recently hung out with me and Orty and doing an episode of Juxtaposition. So make sure you go check that out if you missed it.
Yeah, hopefully I'll do some more guest spots and stuff with other shows. I have a lot of fun doing that. I found out that I enjoy this, even though when we first started it, I did not think I would. And so I'm hoping to do a lot more hanging out with folks on their shows sometimes when they'll have me.
Aren't we going to be joining some other shows in October because we've got some stories?
Yes.
Yeah.
So in October, Juxtaposition usually does a full month of Rocktober. So what we've decided to do is we're going to do normal stuff on our normal nights, but we're also going to kind of cross promote with you guys and figure out what you guys are going to be talking about so we can kind of pick a theme. Because on the nights that you guys are on, we're going to do 90 minutes of you guys doing your thing, and then you guys are going to cross over and join us for the 90 minutes of us doing our thing.
Heck yeah.
I think
That
that'd
sounds
be fun.
fun.
Well, Rick,
And I know as far as you're concerned, you're already set up for October now. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Spooky season here starts on July the 12th.
The day after my birthday.
So we
my house is decorated for Halloween already, and it makes me very happy.
We've got something Halloween up year round.
Yeah.
Yeah, you sound like my sister.
No, I'm going to be doing a virtual tour once I get the house put back together because I tend to destroy the house when I'm like decorating and pulling stuff out. So
we got the Halloween tree put up in the corner, and
that's my Nightmare Before Christmas tree. So I do have a Christmas tree up in July.
Oh, you've reached that level, redneck. Awesome.
I mean, I made my own Oogie Boogie like topper for it and everything a couple of years ago. So he's made out of burlap.
Fun times.
Okay, Rick, it's your turn because you have so much going on.
I don't usually do it as a producer, but since you've asked, I will. All right, so I'll be back tomorrow night doing the America Off the Rails show. That starts at 10 p.m. Eastern. Actually, I'm sorry. For the foreseeable future, it will be 9:30 p.m. Eastern. Then Monday, I do the Rick Robinson show, 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern. That's Monday through Friday. Tuesday night, I'll be producing for Brad and Aggie doing the Cocktail Lounge. Wednesday night, I produce a full boat, starting with myself and Stacey Lennox doing the Whatever show at 7 p.m. Eastern. Then it's usually myself producing for the Conservative Curmudgeon. And then after that, we usually have Fubar this next week. However, she will be off this week, so they're going to push to the following week. So I'm not sure what we're doing with that hour yet. Then usually Ordy and I will be your closing act for the night. Then Thursday, Jen is back from vacation, so we should have Jen and Rick on Thursday night. And Friday night, I will be with Aggie Reekin doing He Said, She Said. And Saturday night is Juxtaposition with myself and Ordinance J. Packard at 10 p.m. Eastern. And that's it as far as radio stuff. I think I lied. Wednesday is not the Conservative Curmudgeon. It's actually Toxic Masculinity. It's our once a month show. When I'm not doing all that, you can find me as a contributor at twitchy.com, misfitspolitics.com, and theloftusparty.com. I'm also the producer for the Loftus Party podcast, and you can follow along with me on social media at RowdyRick73 on most platforms. And oh my God, did I mention my name's Rick and I'm a workaholic and my last meeting was forever ago? Good God. That's a long list.
I don't know how you do all that in one breath.
Yeah.
That was several breaths. I've just been doing this for long enough that I can mask them.
But yeah, good night, y'all, and look for us from now on at Front Porch Forensics.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
We should have thought of that name first because that's just awesome.
He came up with that.
It's one of those moments, a good moment, I guess.
Where's the Lord to take care of that?
Say goodnight, Gracie.